and welcome to the second in our interview series. My name is Audrey Junior and I am a partner with Hill Brown Licensing Solicitors. And I am delighted to be joined by Colin Wilkinson today. Colin is the Managing Director of the Scottish Licensed Trade Association, also known as the SLTA to many. Colin, welcome.
Nice to be here. Nice to see you again after all these months, yes.
I know, virtually.
A bit strange, yes, yeah.
Colin, I don't think we're overstating things by saying that it's been, a catastrophic year for the hospitality trade. Up until now, initially I was saying it was a challenging year, but I think we've gone, way past that now. And I know that the SLT has played a real kind of key role in providing representation during this really difficult time. Can you tell me a bit more about the organisation and who it is you represent and what your role is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the Scottish Licensed Trade Association, we represent mostly independent on-trade sector licensees, some individual operators, some small multiple groups. And our key aims are trade protection, trade development and trade liaison. Trade protection certainly come into the fore this year. We've all been battling against not just the virus itself, but the legislation that's been brought in and the circumstances that we now find ourselves in and how we're having to work. It's only 10 months ago that the SLTA was celebrating its 140th anniversary. And we were reflecting of things in the past where the industry was struggling for survival. Who would have thought, I think it was 5 weeks later, we're in lockdown and the industry is struggling for survival, but for different reasons this time. So yeah, it's certainly been one roller coaster of a year. We were looking forward to new initiatives we were bringing in for training, etc., but everything's on the back burner just now. Until we get through this, which we will, and it depends on what state our industry will be in by that time.
Yeah, I mean, it seems a long time ago that we were at that lunch in Edinburgh celebrating that day, and how quickly everything changed after that. I'm sure it's been quite a challenging year for you, kind of on a personal level as well, because never before has the industry really needed to be fought for quite so fiercely. And I think we're seeing that a lot across the mainstream media and social media. I was wondering, what do you see as being like the scale of the carnage that the industry is facing after this year? I'm sure you've heard so many war stories over the past few months, but how deep is the wound?
Very deep indeed. I mean, we've had calls not just from members. I mean, we opened up our services to everybody because we're all trying to help get through this. We had people very emotional, very upset, distraught on the phone. That continues with each of these periods we go through where we may be open for a while, then we're closed again. So it's been catastrophic for this industry. We've carried out a number of surveys, and two of the most recent, one August time, we reckoned about a third of pubs could be mothballed or may not open again. By September, the end of September, that had flipped and we reckoned about 2/3 of licensed premises could go. It's that serious. Job losses, we were talking up to about 50,000 could be lost just in the pubs and the bar sector alone. I've seen figures, UK figures, where they could be talking up to 250,000 jobs could go for the whole of the hospitality industry and the tourism industry. So yeah, very deep cuts. We're struggling to survive. Get rather annoyed at the government's handouts in the form of grants and support. I mean, they go nowhere near to help keeping us afloat till we get through this. And we've gone beyond the word support now. It's aid that we need. That's how serious this is, if they want us to be here next year.
Yeah. And in terms of those grants, and obviously we've seen the furlough scheme, which was introduced, there was that real period of uncertainty in the kind of latter half of this year where we didn't know if that be continued. And I'm also hearing that there's, in terms of these grants, there's quite a lot of venues that are not being able to access them, particularly kind of tier 3 venues that just haven't had anything yet. Is that horror stories that you're hearing as well?
Very much so, and we're also getting stories, or not stories, but reports where some councils are paying out the maximum amount, some councils are paying out on a pro rata basis, depending on the dates, from the 2nd of November up to the 20th of November, for example. So there's a lot of confusion out there about these grants, but they go nowhere near enough. The furlough scheme, I mean, that was an 11th hour rescue, basically, because October was always going to be the time when businesses would look at whether they could carry on employing staff. And if that hadn't come in, I think there would have been thousands of job losses, because we had heard that people were making that decision, they had to. The problem is that, I think people sort of think the furlough scheme, yes, it is good. It is keeping people employed. But if the businesses themselves do not get direct aid, then that business isn't going to be there, that job's not going to be there, and that member of staff isn't going to be able to get the furlough. So, there's still a huge threat to both businesses and the staff that they employ. We have bounce back loans. A lot of those will have been used by now. And we have to remember that's a loan. So, you're going to have to pay that back. And unless we get more realistic levels of support, I fear very much for many of the people that are involved in this industry.
Yeah, I saw there was some stats released yesterday about Scotland receiving significantly less support per business than like Wales, for example, which is just, something needs to be done about that, as you say.
Yeah, well, I find that, we keep hearing about the devolved governments are all going to work together and with a common purpose. It doesn't seem to be the case. When funding's come to Scotland, it's not all come to the licensed trade, whereas, perhaps in England, more has been done at that time. And obviously the announcement in Wales, that certainly angered very many of us here. And something just has to be done about this. Yeah.
Just kind of moving on slightly from the funding side of things, I know that as an organisation, you've been quite vocal about your concerns sort of generally about the way that you've been, the hospitality industry has been treated by the Scottish Government, in particular in relation to, the restrictions placed on them. And there's that big question mark about evidence that we're seeing going unanswered kind of across the country, making that tie between what is, undoubtedly a run, organised, safe industry, the money that's been invested that I'm seeing people spending on all of these kind of mitigating factors to make it COVID secure. But as I say, I know that kind of as an organisation, you've been voicing concerns about how the government have treated the industry. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I think in one sentence, we're the sacrificial lamb, basically. The failure of the government to control this virus, we feel we've been targeted on, even though we have all these mitigation measures in place. It's estimated we've spent in Scotland between 80 and 90 million and putting these in, training, etc., etc. So in our view, we're providing a very safe environment. When you consider other sectors, and I'm sure we've all experienced it when we go into certain other sectors, I won't name them, but they seem to have far less restrictions in place. They don't have the test and protect, all sorts of things. And Public Health England, and I think now Public Health Scotland, have come out with figures which actually show that supermarkets are the worst or the most likely place where you could catch this infection. Then schools, colleges, universities, and when you get down to pubs, hotels, restaurants, it's about 1%, 1.5%, depending on which part of that sector you're in. So an argument is, well, why have we got these very heavily over-restricted measures put in place, and we're paying the price for others' failures?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, particularly when you talk about supermarkets, at the start there was controlled entry, there was social distancing, but now it's a free-for-all.
Yeah, don't see it at all. So I think that's an appalling situation. And the government, we've asked them to speak to us before they make the decisions. We can then possibly help for them to see the difficulties that we might have as an industry. But I'm sure you're all aware we raised a pre-action letter for judicial review because of the fact of the the way the government was introducing these measures, they're being rushed through, very little consultation. Even MSPs complained about the whole system, and that just cannot go on. And we also had the issue about the evidence. Please show us. I will remember the words of Professor Jason Leitch, who said many weeks ago, and perhaps months ago now, we do not have that evidence at that granular level. Well, how can you make that decision then? And we keep pressing for this. We've had a response to the judicial review, which wasn't satisfactory, didn't answer what we had asked. And a second letter has gone back, and really looking for some form of undertakings that the industry can be more involved with, and that there's more realistic support if we are going to be facing longer restriction measures, which we're all waiting on this announcement today. I'm not very optimistic it's going to make a huge difference to the licensed trade, particularly at this time of year when, we should be very, very busy.
Yeah. I mean, what has been your engagement with the government over the past year? I mean, I know that Jack and you and various others have been involved in some discussions kind of along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's been helpful, or do you think it could have been a lot more?
It has been helpful, and I have to say, when we put that pre-action letter in, there was increased activity, shall we say, with communications between the government and the industry bodies that were all together in that complaint to the government. That's kind of waned a bit now, I would have to say. We have these meetings every week, sometimes twice a week. But to be honest, I think we're going over the same arguments as we have been, particularly over the last couple of months. And to me, they are just not listening. And I don't think they're fully realising the critical state that we are in at the moment, this industry is in at this moment. Yeah.
And one of the kind of key points that was raised in that judicial review was about the curfew, and the way that was the initial curfew was brought in.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've obviously moved on in terms of the regulations, and we now have
mm-hmm.
a level system, which arguably has even more restrictive curfews than previously. What do you see as being the logic behind curfews, or can you see any at all, or
I certainly can. I mean, what does time make? What difference does that make to what we're dealing with this virus? And as for the curfews, the times that have been set with the restrictions, I mean, to close at 6 o'clock at night in level 3, it just does absolutely ridiculous. And businesses are losing the opportunity of second sittings, etc. with some of the restrictions that are in place. So we just don't understand, again, where is the evidence to show that will actually do what they reckon it will? And, we're coming out of this, well, sort of West Central Scotland had this lockdown. And to me, that just showed that the restrictions that were in place in October, well, what did that do with what was the restrictions that were set onto the licensed trade? Didn't seem to make any difference to the figures. So, why have we got this again? So I go back to, we're a sacrificial lamb here. That's what it seemed. And I think a lot of people are also saying there's an alcohol issue here as well that's creeping in.
Yeah, certainly. I saw some stats, I think earlier, kind of last week, where there was one operator was put together quite openly statistics about the difference that a dinner service would make to them in tier 3, even without alcohol. Was kind of allowed them just about to break even.
Yeah.
And it's just unbelievable that we're in a position that these operators are quality venues in Scotland, and they're been under so much intense pressure, particularly when they've made that investment in all of the kind of COVID security measures, if you can call them that. It's a seriously difficult time for everyone. Yesterday was obviously quite a landmark day. The first vaccinations were administered. I mean, I know people have varying different views on vaccinations, but surely this has to be a positive step forward. And in terms of the industry, hopefully this will be a step in getting us reopened again. Mm-hmm. There's been some talk about a potential immunity passport, or something that you have to carry around to get access to hospitality venues or to travel. I'm not sure how founded they are, but what would be your thoughts on something like that?
I could perhaps see the advantage if it was to do with travel, yes, tourism, that kind of thing. I just don't see how that's going to work in the licensed trade because, does that mean you're going to have to monitor your door and only let certain people in if they have the immunity passport? Does it mean that we'll have a reduction in the restriction of hours because we allow that to happen? I think it's going to be far too confusing. I've read a couple of bits on it, and I was hearing about, some people may deliberately then try and catch the virus who are, healthy, so that they can get this passport and then they can go and do more. So does that kind of defeat the purpose of what you're trying to do at the moment? So perhaps for travel, yes, but I could see a lot of complications for that within the licensed hospitality trades. I just don't know how you'd be able to manage that.
Yeah, and I do wonder, at what stage, the vaccine rollout's starting now, but it'll take a while, for the population to be vaccinated. And at what stage does the government consider it proportionate to allow hospitality to open, to a greater extent?
Because it really take months before everybody's vaccinated. Let's be honest. And the big issue for us at the moment is, we keep hearing about spring 2021. Things should start to get back to some sort of normality. But who's going to be left by 2021? What businesses are still going to be there? And that's the problem. And yes, these are all positive things that are coming out, but it's what's happening now is the key thing. If we're to be there in 2021 and be part of building back the Scottish economy, of which we're a very important factor. When you consider 71% of tourists visit licensed premises, you could argue we're the biggest tourist attraction there is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the saddest things that I'm dealing with at the moment, I feel, is it's every kind of couple of days there's another company that's gone into administration, and we're dealing with that, and that's the stark reality of it. The grants just aren't enough. Rents are still need to be paid. It's impossible.
And I feel like the government and Visit Scotland and all these bodies are doing the best they can to try and get things back up and running for 2021 and create events to attract tourism, etc. But I go back to what tourism industry or businesses are going to be left for these people to use when we do get back to some sort of normality.
Yeah, the SLTA also represents some late night operators, is that right?
Yes, we have some. Yes, and of course they were really badly affected. I mean, they got nothing until just recently, and even the restrictions down at level 1, still do not help that industry at all. So I mean, that's another. And I don't think we should forget the supply chain, because they've been seriously affected by this. And if we don't have these businesses and local businesses that supply our premises, there's another problem that's coming. So I think we have to remember the whole of the licensed trade industry and include the supply industry as well.
Yeah. The last question is a bit more of a personal one. When the restrictions are lifted, what would be your ideal ice cold and Alex moment? Now, I have to admit, I had to Google this.
Oh dear! That shows my age, because I know what that is. Yes.
So slightly embarrassed to say I had to Google it, but the film was released in 1957, so that is my defence. So yeah, essentially, what would be your perfect experience in terms of the hospitality industry? Food, drink, music.
Well, it would probably be to recreate that very scene in a very hot climate with a very cold pint of lager. No, I think, for personally speaking, it would be nice to go out, have a meal, and have your friends face to face. We've done the virtual meals where we've had the same menu, and we've obviously been in our own houses. And it was all right to start with, but that kind of just wears off. It's just not the same. So I think to have that sort of personal interaction with friends and colleagues is something I and my family have missed very much. Yes.
Yeah, I think the online socialising novelty is very much worn off.
Definitely.
And you can't underestimate the importance of that that interaction, that personal interaction with other human beings.
Yeah, exactly.
The hospitality industry just plays such an important part in facilitating that. So hopefully we'll be back there soon.
Very soon, yes. I might even get a passport, yes.
Thanks, Colin. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, Colin. It's very much appreciated. I know you're a busy man. And thank you very much to everybody for tuning in and listening.